On today's episode of Survive and Thrive 8791, we welcome back to studios head coach Bo Ryan. He will talk about some of his early coaching experience as well as some recruiting stories that he has picked up over the years. You will enjoy today's episode, I guarantee you. Here we go. Good morning. What is up? Welcome to another segment of Survive and Thrive 8791. I'm your host, Coach Decorah. We are in the Buck and Honey's remote studios high above University Avenue on the west side of our great capital city, Madison, Wisconsin. You can follow the podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, iHeartRadio, and YouTube at Survive and Thrive 8791. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter, the Big X at Decorah 8791, as well as hitting me up on Facebook at yours truly, Tim Decorah. Glad you could join us today wherever you happen to be. Quick question. We have our special guest back in studio, Coach Bo Ryan. Coach, what did you think of that? What did you think of that music? Is that in your genre, on your playlist?
Well, I'll tell you what, my foot was going to the beat. That's what I needed. Any music that gets me to do that is good music. It had a great beat to it. The old bandstand, they used to give ratings to new songs. They say, well, I like the beat, or they'd say, oh, it was too slow, and they'd say, oh, I'd give it an 80, or I'd give it a 50. But I don't think there's a lot of people out there that remember American Bandstand when it was in Philly back in the 50s and 60s.
Philly, really?
Before it went out to L.A. Yes. It was great. They had certain couples that people, if it was this day and age, their NIL would have been pretty high because they were highlighted all the time. And it used to be on for several hours, not just an hour, when it went out to L.A. So it was a great time. My sister actually danced on Bandstand one time. She actually got into dance, and she always taught me her dance moves, and we used to win dance contests.
Really?
There were different firehouses in the Chester area, and they would have the twist, they'd have the mashed potatoes, the stomp, the Bristol stomp, by the way, the monkey, the jerk. there were locomotion, the hop, Danny and the Juniors. So anyhow, probably a lot of people out there never heard of those different groups, but or people. But it was a fun time, and music definitely. For anybody growing up in the Philly area, the Philly sound had a big part in all the memories of people that have grown up there.
Yeah, really. All right. Hey, I do want to ask you, just because, what did you think? Would you, on a scale of 8 to 10, 8 being pretty good, 10 being really good, what do you think of that music?
Well, I think I'd probably give it a 9, kind of in between. A little slow start, but it built up to a pretty good beat, pretty good background sound. I'm not exactly sure what instruments are ever used because I never had the opportunity to play an instrument, but I really did like the beat. So
we're going to go 9. Okay,
I'm going to go 9.
The pizza guy would say that a 9.0 would be a rookie score, but hey, we'll take that because that was. I wanted to mention a former student of mine, Jack Sulverson, produced that music, and he's got music on Spotify. So when you are done listening to today's show, you'll be able to hit up Jack Sulverson on Spotify. He produced that, so I wanted to give him a big shout out. So he'll be happy to know that future Hall of Fame head coach Bo Ryan gave him a 9.0 out of the 10.
Go get him, Jack.
So yeah, go get him, Jack. All right, today we are glad to have Coach Bo Ryan back on set. Some of you might be asking yourself, Bo Ryan, well, I wanted to have Coach on as guest until his induction into the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame on Sunday night, October 13th. this is my way of honoring my college coach and a great way to kick off the podcast because a lot of people, unfortunately, Coach, they know who you are. Also, you, the listener, would get some of the awesome stories that I heard as a player with so much entertainment and always a lesson to be learned. Anyway, welcome back, Coach Ryan. I did want to ask, because you did mention that you canceled a golf outing this afternoon. The weather has been cooperating with your golf game. Tell us about your golf game.
Well, I think my golf game is kind of in a rut. I shoot anywhere from 88 to 92 pretty much every time out there. It's Nakoma is a very tight course, and there are an awful lot of pitch outs from the tree lines. And for some reason, I think what they did at Nakoma way back in the day when they built the course, they said, where would a 70-some-year-old ex-basketball coach hit the ball? And then they picked those spots and they put either water there or sand there. I think that's what they did to me. And I'm sticking to that story.
All right.
It's a challenge.
Yeah, I remember you swinging the stick at Platteville Country Club back in the day, and I know it's a game that you like to get out. Are you a rider or are you a walker?
I'm a rider. Walking, I save for the workouts on my Peloton or elliptical treadmill. I get my cardiovascular that way. I think with the cart, it keeps play moving a little better. But obviously, there are a lot of people who enjoy the walk, and you know what Mark Twain said: golf is a good walk spoiled. So,
good walk spoiled.
But no, I have walked at times, but I really enjoy the cart ride and the camaraderie, and now you can play music in your golf cart.
Yep.
Again, everybody has speakers, and so I try to enjoy the best of both worlds. As far as I still get a lot of steps in because I use the what do we call that for measuring steps? The
your used to be called
my
the old
Fitbit. My
pedometer,
Fitbit.
Fitbit. Yeah.
So anyhow, I didn't realize the miles that I walked, even though we were driving in a cart, because of where you park the carts, and we try not to go on any of the grass whenever the cart paths are around. So you still get some steps in.
All right, now I know we're going to talk about the Philly roll here in a little bit, but are you taking any lunch money from the guys you golf with at all? Or?
Well, it goes in streaks. It's everybody. We don't play for a lot. I don't play for a lot of money at all. We just everybody throws. Out in California, we just throw $20 in the pot, and then at the end, you see what team had the best score, or what individual, or how many skins, where the person got the lowest score on that hole, things like that. So it really, nobody gets hurt, in other words.
For the love of the game. Well, we're going to move on here. We've heard so much about Coach's days at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville, the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and, of course, most recently, the Wisconsin Badger men's basketball team. But we're going to go back in a little bit of time to start to lead into our first segment. So, Coach, if we can keep you on the clock to about, I'd say maybe a minute and a half. If you get it in before then, great. If you go a little extension, we might have to give you the old the hook.
Just give me a signal.
We'll give you the little hand, the little rascal signal. So again, we talked about those head coaching positions. I want to hear in 90 seconds or less. Tell us about Brookhaven Junior High School. Head man there.
Yeah, well, Brookhaven Junior High School, the job came about as a result of the principal there saw me do my student teaching one day, and after the class was over, he said, hey, I got a job for you, head basketball coach, assistant baseball coach, because he knew I had played baseball. and a social studies position. So that was my first teaching job, and I really enjoyed it. 7th through 9th graders, an interesting time period in all of our lives when you're talking 12 to 14 years old or 15. And, we ended up having a program that went to the state tournament for the first time in the school's history. And the guys became very proud of that. And it was fulfilling from the standpoint that you're never sure until you get to be in that position of being a head coach where you're calling the shots. So the fact that the guys rallied, they pulled together, they listened, they worked, and they saw the results of that. So Brookhaven, I owe a lot to Bruce Williams, the principal that hired me, and to that school.
Yeah, we always seem to remember that first job. The one thing I find pretty interesting is that you being removed from the middle school, junior high classroom, you got the ages right on. You were 6 to 4, or not 6, 12 to about 15 years old. You hit it right on the head. So now you go from Brookhaven Junior High, and then you're catapulted to kind of moving up the ladder a little bit. The next stop was Dominican College of Racine. Tell us your 90 seconds or less on that one. Ready, go, Coach.
Well, this one is Coach Bill Cofield was coaching at Prairie View A&M. Before that, he had coached at Lincoln University, right near Chester, my hometown. He was looking for a head basketball coach and a head baseball coach and assistant basketball coach. So he called 2 former players that he had at Lincoln University, and both of them, and I just was in contact with one of them, or both of them actually, about a week ago. They said, well, we can't because we just took jobs, but there's a guy who just got out of the Army who's coaching at a junior high school, and he wants to be a college coach. So Bill Cofield called me on the phone. We talked for several hours. I flew out to Milwaukee. He picked me up, and we drove down to Racine. And he hired me on the spot. So, I was making $3,000 a year, and he gave me a contract for $10,000 a year. So that's a pretty good boost in the early '70s, I would say.
Yeah, I'm no math guy, but that sounds like about a 200 or 300% raise. And then I've heard this little funny kind of a little quip where somebody says, well, when I leave, the place is probably burned to the ground. Well, in your case, the place didn't burn to the ground. What happened when you left?
Well, they couldn't meet their bills. It was something that was happening in the '70s to other places too. There were other colleges that shut down, not just in Wisconsin, but throughout the country. If your endowments weren't pretty substantial, there was a rough period there. So Dominican College closed their doors. But I stayed. It was after basketball season when this happened, but I stayed and coached the baseball team without getting any salary. And I would go to the Racine unemployment line and collect my shekels and used it basically for gas for our team when we went on the road. They let me finish coaching the season. And the great part was we had the best season in the history of the school. So I was so proud of those guys that they were digging into their own pockets to be able to get meals on the road. And we tried to hustle as much as we could to get some funds. But they are so proud of what they accomplished, and I'm so proud of them that they even gave me Coach of the Year in baseball. And I still have the letter from the league, and and Kelly, it's where I met Kelly, and the rest is history.
Yeah. I mean, I know we're going to circle back because you wanted to talk about some of the jobs that you've had, and it's not with Coach Ryan, it's not basketball 365, as you can hear him talk about, baseball, basketball, being in the Army. So there's other things that I think I think our listening audience and the subscribers are going to want to hear some of that. So you leave Dominican College in Racine, and your first head coaching, well, not, yeah, I would say your first head coaching position at what I would call getting up there in the big leagues is Sun Valley High School in Ashton, Pennsylvania. So you go back to Pennsylvania. Tell us in 90 seconds or less about Sun Valley High School.
Well, it actually was not too far from Chester. It was in the same league with Chester, which is my hometown, and so I had to coach against my old school, and we did pretty well against them, considering the year before I got there, Chester had beaten Sun Valley, I think, by 40-some points, and it was not pretty, which is one of the reasons jobs are open when something like that happens. So. But again, we finally turned it around, and it was just such a hungry bunch of guys that ended up wanting to be a part of something special, and they did, and they went to the state tournament for the first time, and it was really exciting. We got beat by a pretty good team. If we'd have won that game, we'd have played in the Palestra. And I was fortunate enough to have not only played in the Palestra in high school when we played in the state tournament, but also to coach in the Palestra when we played against Penn.
Oh, yeah.
And Fran Dunphy was coaching there at the time. So Sun Valley was great because of being in the head spot and calling the shots. You learn a lot about the game, things that became natural later. Sometimes had to come the hard way, hard knocks. But by studying film early, my assistant, his wife, came to me and said, "You have to stop working my husband so hard. He's lost 15 pounds." So I didn't realize that I was expecting an assistant coach to put in as much time as I did. Now, what was wrong with that thinking, Tim? I think that's. But Sun Valley proved to be, to me, that okay, these things can work. These and you still have a lot to learn, kid. So take what you learned and build on it. And fortunately, later on, I got that chance to be a head coach again.
Yeah, that was funny. I'm going to just touch on before we go to the next little item here. Film study, was that the 16 millimeter reel? Or?
It was reel to reel. Yep, and it was. Yeah.
There wasn't synergy or huddle back then. It was reel to reel.
It was, a friend of mine would get up in the top part of the bleachers and film the game. And I would study it some more. And when you think you have enough, you do it one more time. So we learned quite a bit from our film work.
Well, I was going to mention, here's the kind of the last part, but in 1976, I was going to have you touch on how you got to be an assistant at the University of Wisconsin. You already touched on that, and you go from Ashton, Pennsylvania, high school ball, to really one of the premier conferences in all of college basketball, the Big Ten. How does a varsity high school coach from Pennsylvania end up in Madison, Wisconsin?
I get that question more than probably any other question. The reason is I didn't have a player to deliver to them. A lot of guys are getting jobs and have gotten jobs over the years because they were able to deliver some players to the head coach. And I was hired, Coach Cofield told me, for basketball knowledge and drill work and scouting reports, things like that. A lot of people were, who's this 20-some-year-old guy coming from the East Coast coming here to the Dairyland? It was, people were wondering. And needless to say, in our profession, you can't worry about what people are saying. You just got to work. You just got to roll your sleeves up and do what's necessary to make sure that, things get done and that the players are getting better, they're developing. And that's something that I learned coaching in high school and junior high, is that development, which is kind of lost nowadays with the way things are going with the transfer portal and the NIL as it's set up. So, you know, it was something where I just felt I needed it. I needed to get into an environment where you're playing against the best. If you're going to coach something, coach the best. And the Big Ten was the best. The teams were so packed. We had very good players, but it didn't show by how many NCAA tournaments we made. Of course, there were a lot fewer teams going to the NCAA tournament then. But it was Coach Cofield gave me the biggest break that I could possibly have hoped for, and he believed in me. And you know, being the first African American head coach in the Big Ten drew a lot of scrutiny from people in the 70s. And you know, there's a lot of pressure when you take on the responsibility of being the head of a company, the CEO, the head coach, the athletic director. All those positions are difficult because of all the variety of issues, problems, discussions, you know, things that you have to go through. But Coach Cofield believed in me, and I'll tell you, I tried to pay him back. And the best way to say thank you to people is to get things done. You know, is to make some things happen. So he got me started on that line from the major college level for sure.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I mean, there's two things I gleaned from that. Number one, to make somebody proud, you know, do the job like you just said. And then the other thing is just circling back to with Coach Cofield had you at Dominican College, and then always staying loyal to guys that got the job done earlier. So it's probably a no-brainer for Coach Cofield to bring you to the University of Wisconsin. And third, the University of Wisconsin always being kind of on the front end of doing things that maybe other people aren't doing by bringing in an African American college coach to the Big Ten. So that's pretty cool. We're going to get to our sponsor link here. So Coach Ryan kept just moving up to bigger and better things like our sponsor, Buck and Honey's Restaurants, where they cover all the budgets and appetites. Consistency is what keeps driving people back to Buck and Honey's with bigger and better locations in Sun Prairie, Monona, Wanakee, and Mount Horeb. So we're going to switch. We're going to take just a smidge break here, and then we're going to come right back to segment number one. And we're going to probably have to cut this one a little short, Coach, but it's going to be the recruiting of a player that ended up turning out pretty special, and maybe not too many people know that this player was at the University of Wisconsin, and you're going to kind of give us a little backstory, but I'll give the front, and then you'll take the baton and run with it. But there's a pretty cool story that I've always liked, and hopefully the listeners will as well. So we'll be back in just a second. Okay, we are back. Segment number one, and actually that little first intro part there probably was its own segment. So we're going to pinch this one a little bit, but I want to talk about the recruiting story of one Jerry Ice Reynolds. Some of the listeners who are a little bit older will remember Jerry Ice Reynolds. I'm just going to go through some quick notes for those of you that forgot but remember, or those of you that don't know. This guy was pretty darn good, and he turned out pretty good in the end too. So some quick notes. Jerry Ice Reynolds was from Brooklyn, New York, where Coach Ryan recruited him to Madison, Wisconsin. If you look him up on Wikipedia, he winds up going from MATC, which is the Madison Area Technical College, a 2-year school in Madison, Wisconsin, goes to LSU, Louisiana State University, the proud alum of Shaquille O'Neal. He winds up leaving LSU, winds up getting drafted by I say our because we're in Madison, we're in the state of Wisconsin, Milwaukee Bucks as the 22nd pick of the 1985 NBA draft. He would enjoy an 8-year NBA career with the Bucks. the Seattle Supersonics, which are no more, and the Orlando Magic. So I want to have you, Coach, tell us about how we almost got that type of player to Madison. It wasn't like the Badgers and University of Wisconsin were a destination place like they were when you were the coach in 2000 to or 2001 or 2 to 2015. Wasn't a destination place in the 70s or 80s, but tell us a little bit about how we almost had that shot of getting him here.
Well, we had made some inroads when we recruited Wes Matthews out of Bridgeport, Connecticut, and that's Wes Matthews Sr., and also Larry Petty out of Power Memorial High School, Skip Jackson out of New York City also. But there were some teams that they played on, not necessarily during the high school season, but kind of like the AAU now, but it wasn't as prolific as it is now. But so these guys were kind of familiar with that. Nice visited us on an official visit, and then what happened was while we were recruiting them, we had to keep reminding them about GPA and something you don't hear very much about anymore. Mm-hmm. So he had to really buckle down in order to get in to the University of Wisconsin. And so he had to pick up a couple classes at MATC. What we didn't know was they did a survey of the top 10 high school players in the country. And they interviewed him. And Ice, a very honest young man, really a neat kid. And his mom had a hearing problem, so a lot of hand sign language was used in the house. But to give you an idea what Ice was like, just a nice kid. And he ends up telling the NCAA, they asked, how did you get from the airport to the campus on this unofficial visit? Because you can only make one visit to a school. Well, he got on an airplane and got to Madison on his own. We didn't even know he was coming. And so without cell phones and all that kind of thing, he just... we didn't even, I don't know if he had an uncle or whatever, but we didn't know he was coming. So he said, I got a ride from the airport to the campus. And then they kept asking him more and more questions. And well, where did you stay? Since it wasn't an official visit, where he says, I slept on the floor of two of the other players. And meanwhile, the NCAA is writing all this down, and they tell us that we can't give him a scholarship, that he can go anywhere else and this was after he had started at MATC in order to be eligible to get into Wisconsin. So we lost out on a pretty good player and a really nice young man. You and I were talking before, one of the more unique visits I ever made to a high school was I parked my car and the high school was a couple blocks away. It was cold, windy. And so I saw a couple kids come out of a side door, and so the door was still flapping a little. It was open. It was ajar. So instead of walking all the way around to the front of the high school, because I had been there before for a high school game, I went, I'll just duck in here and go to the office and check in. Well, no sooner did I open the door and took a step in from around the staircase.
30 below, 30 mile an hour winds, and it's very cold outside.
So my parents didn't raise a fool when it came to trying to stay warm. A guy comes from around the corner with a gun pointing right at me and, don't move. What are you doing? And I'm in a three-piece suit with a briefcase. And I said, I'm a college recruiter, University of Wisconsin. He says, okay, open up the briefcase in case there was anything I shouldn't have. And so I did, and he got it, and then he put the gun away and said, all right, sorry, you apologize, I'll walk you up to the office. And so that was, I thought it was pretty funny too when I told him about it later. But anyhow, he ended up playing, needless to say, at LSU, did very well, got drafted, played in the NBA, and did a pretty good job for himself.
Yeah, that's almost like that story of when the University of Wisconsin was recruiting a coach and Bob Knight came, and it's probably for another time, but I don't know if many of the listeners know that we had a chance to get Bob Knight, and a few things got spilled. The beans got spilled a little bit, and he didn't want to have that, and he pulled his name out, and having a guy like Jerry Ice Reynolds. But when you already touched on this, Coach, that you already had a great track record of attracting the likes of Wes Matthews, a great player from Connecticut who would go on and win 2 rings with the Lakers. You had Claude Gregory, a 6'8" forward from Washington, D.C. We had Larry Petty, center from Power Memorial, and we talked about Power Memorial about 10 to 15 years before that. They had a pretty good player by the name of Lou Alcindor. Those of you that don't know who Big Lou is, he later became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And then Joe Trinellick out of Milwaukee Pius. So you already established yourself as a really good recruiter, and not just holding yourself to just the Wisconsin area, but I think your ties with the East Coast. So that's a heck of a story. So heck of a story, very much like the success of Tommy Anderson and his Buck and Honey's restaurants have had in the Madison area with locations in Monona, Waunakee, Mount Horeb, and the home office in Sun Prairie. Buck and Honey's has been winning hearts and appetites with their affordable prices that can fit anyone's budget. We're going to roll on to segment number 2 after just a little brief break. We're going to talk about the Philly roll, and we're also going to compartmentalize or bring along Coach Lefty Driesell as part of the Philly roll. So I'm going to have you tell those 2 dynamite stories. So we'll be back in just a second. All right, we're back. Segment 2 is going to be on. Every time I hear my wife and I talk about this, the Philly roll, it makes me chuckle. And we're also going to talk about Lefty Driesell because he has a role with the Philly roll. But sometimes survival has a lot to do with more than just with appearance than you would really know. You can be extremely successful with a great approach and smarts. But I think it also has a little, maybe if you're lacking in that, you might have to do something to make yourself look a little better. So this brings me to the story of recruiting at the highest levels of college basketball. A couple of stories that I remember Coach Ryan telling us was the legend of the Philly roll and the recruiting tactics of Maryland head coach Lefty Driesell. So before we get to Coach Driesell, can you touch on the legend of the Philly roll a little bit, Coach?
Well, I didn't grow up knowing a whole lot of people that had money, but there were some characters, as there are in every city, and there was this guy who was a big timer, or at least he thought he was, and so this is where I learned the term. He would come in. My dad would take me to this bar restaurant, and this guy would come in flashing money, and he always had 2 $100 bills on the outside of the wad of money, paper money that he had, and underneath he had 20 to 30 $1 bills, and he would always come in and say, all right, drinks on the house, and he'd pull the top 100 off, and then there's another 100 underneath it. And I think it was my dad or an uncle who was also there said, yeah, he's pulling the Philly roll again. It was so. Then I'm in Chicago because that's where my wife is from, And Kelly's, and we are in this bar restaurant, and there was another guy who had the same thing, two $100 bills, took the top 100 off and said, here, I'll pay for these drinks. And he called it the Chicago roll. So I guess I just figured that every town had that guy or two or somebody that was going to try to be a big timer and have a big fat wad of cash money with two $100 bills and the rest ones. And so the Philly roll.
Yeah,
That's what we called it.
My wife and I once in a while be out, and it's rare that you would see the Philly roll anymore because you have to use your touch and your tap and your slide, credit card now. So there's not many dudes or people walking around with the Philly roll, but we used to call that maybe not necessarily the Philly roll, but chump change, and you always had some money in your pocket and a little extra money that you maybe worked a little side hustle, or in our case, maybe you took somebody's lunch money at noon hour, and then you always had some money for candy or whatever you needed, or extra bubblegum sticks or baseball cards.
Baseball cards, yeah.
Baseball cards. So
left pocket, right pocket.
Yeah. So if
when you go gambling, you put the money you can afford to lose in your left pocket, and when that's gone, you do not touch the right pocket.
Oh, well, for the listeners out there, we're going a little on how to keep a good budget. Yeah, spend the left, keep the right. I love it. So that brings us to Coach Driesell, and I chuckle every time.
Did you get that pronunciation from somewhere?
Driesell.
Driesell. Lefty Driesell is what we used to always say.
Okay. I'm not from the Philly East Coast area, so that's my Midwestern drawl. So Coach Lefty Driesell, rest in peace, passed away the last couple of years here. Actually, I take that back. He passed away in February of 2024. Lefty was a college coach for 40 plus years with stops at Davidson, and that would be Davidson prior to Seth Curry.
Seth Curry, yeah.
Maryland. I think, unfortunately, for the death of Len Bias, I think that had to tie in with him leaving Maryland. James Madison. He went to James Madison, and then he ended at Georgia State. And if I'm not mistaken, Georgia State had just gone Division I or open to college, and Lefty was their head coach. Being able to hang on for that amount of time, he probably had to have some very creative ways of getting players, which leads us to some of the recruiting stories of Coach Driesell. So would you touch on a couple?
Following up on the Philly roll, I'm at a game in Pittsburgh. Lefty Driesell's there, and about 10 other Division I coaches. Do
you remember who you're recruiting for the listeners?
Yeah, it was Snuffy Smith, James Smith, Larry Anderson, who ended up going to Vegas. Snuffy Smith came with us, and then later on transferred after a couple years. And the other player ended up at, I think, George Washington, maybe. But he stood up, and we're in this section of the bleachers, and he pulls out the wad of money from his pocket.
The Philly roll.
And he peels off the 100 off the top, and he has a little kid. He figures the rules. He can buy, soda and popcorn and whatever for little kids. That's not a recruiting violation. So he gives the $100 bill to like a 12-year-old kid, and he says, I want you to go buy as much popcorn and as much soda as you can, because it's the East Coast, it's soda. And the kid goes down, he takes his buddy, of course, all his buddies in the stands there, they chase after him, and Lefty's making sure everybody sees the wad, the roll, and then puts his hand back in his pocket. And they come back with as much as they could get for $100 in the stands, and he was the man. Those kids followed him out into the lobby after the game. They followed him to his car. They wanted to know if he had any more. He said, and I'm thinking to myself, he's lucky he doesn't get rolled himself, speaking of the Philly roll. But also Lefty had billboards made when a kid would visit McMillan, Bias, anybody, any players, when they would visit, they'd take out a billboard. A lot of NCAA rules were made because of Lefty, and so he would put this billboard up there, and it's like, whoa. The young man would come in to get from the airport, and he's on the drive, and he's looking, and it's like, there's his picture, not Lefty's picture, but the student athlete's picture on the billboard. He did the things with the uniform where you have your name on the back, and that was a rule that was put in. You can't do that anymore. You can't publicize a recruit on a visit. But a lot of things that Lefty did ended up being considered violations, but he found a way until they made the rule, and then he found another way, and it just he was innovative. He loved competition, loved the game, loved the bantering with the officials, and he was quite the character. May he rest in peace.
The lefty rule. I remember you also. I know there's so much in that head coach years that it's hard to keep track of it all, but I know part of that story was you talked about the coat that he had. You know, you roll in with the normal coat, but when you're going to roll into some schools where you want to look like the guy, in addition to having that Philly roll, pull it out of the pocket of the coat, and the coat was didn't you say it was a fur coat?
Yeah, whatever the fur was, I don't know. I'm no expert on animal pelts.
And then I know,
but yeah, he dressed better than anybody else. Yeah, for sure.
And then I think the other story was, I know when you were at UW Milwaukee, you're renting a car and you're on just a real tight budget. I'm sure Lefty's budget would allow him to get a Lincoln Continental from the airport, so he'd roll up in a Lincoln.
He would always have the best car in the parking lot at the tournaments, the high school tournaments that we would go to. Yeah, he was flamboyant, and there's not a whole lot of guys like him anymore. And I mean, he wasn't cheating. What he was doing, he was finding a way that maybe other people hadn't thought about how to impress, dress for success and impress, and kind of his motto. But he could coach. He could get players to do things that would show that they've definitely developed, where they're getting coaching, and his teams are always fun to watch.
Yeah, I know we talked a little bit off air in between the two segments here, and I made the reference that, hey, you and I know exactly the same thing. We interview back to back. You go in first, and you've got a polo on and nice slacks, and I come in and follow that up with I've got nice slacks on and I got a suit on. And depending upon the job, if it's a business job, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to probably get the job just based on the dress like you said, dress for success, and sometimes it might make up for some deficiencies in some other places. But yeah, I think that really makes
smoke and mirrors.
Really makes a huge difference. And sometimes you gotta do that. And yeah, that's good stuff. So our call to action on this episode is sometimes you have to play many roles. Pardon the pun there, Philly roles. Maybe do a little acting to give yourself an advantage, kind of like Coach Driesell did, especially when you're trying to get into college, you're trying to land that big job, or you're trying to move up the ladder, just like we heard Coach Ryan moving up the ladder from Brookhaven Middle School to Dominican College of Racine, back to Stony Brook. No.
Sun Valley.
Sun Valley, yes. Back to Sun Valley, and then to the University of Wisconsin, and then ultimately we've heard from, University of Wisconsin-Platteville, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and then ultimately ending his coaching career at the University of Wisconsin. So moving up in that professional world. On our next episode from the Buck and Honey's remote studios, we are going to have a special walk down memory lane with this. First of all, the first segment will be getting the call from the Hall, when Coach Ryan will talk about getting that call from the Hall of Fame. And then we're also going to go back to where it all started, Chester, Pennsylvania. You've heard Coach talk about Chester, PA. I've heard so much about Chester, PA that I think it's on my bucket list of places to visit. Those will be some really good stories. And unfortunately, Coach, I think we'll have to have Kelly have a couple of boxes of Kleenex around, because I think it's going to be some special times talking about that, getting the call from the Hall, and then talking about your hometown, Chester, PA, because I see you puff up, Coach, when you say Chester, PA. So until next time, do what you have to do, like Coach has done, like I've done, like you need to do. Do what you have to do to survive and thrive. See you next time.